Good evening, and welcome to another episode of Mothman Podcast. Tonight's story was a call-in, and it was, we'll call this, Do Zombies Really Live Amongst Us? The story started with two young men who lived in northern North Carolina, there along the Virginia border, in a small town called Sandy Ridge. These two individuals, one was Dale and one was Gary. They had been working at a local farm and were walking home. And on their way home, they stopped at a cornfield and climbed up on a wooden fence there that was surrounding the cornfield. And we're talking about a young lady who had just moved into the area. And this young lady was going to their school, and so they were discussing it. In the background, you could see fireflies that were lighting up in the area, and you could hear the crickets. It was just a nice summer evening. In the distance, you could hear a thunderstorm building, and when the thunderstorm was getting closer, it was throwing out lightning, and the lightning would light up the cornfield. During one of those episodes where the cornfield was lit up, there's a figure that showed up in the cornfield, and Dale looked at Gary and said, "Did you see that?" And Gary said, "Yeah, what was it?" And Dale said, "Well, it must have been just an old scarecrow. It was scary looking." And Gary acknowledged that it was scary looking. Well, they talked for just a moment or two longer, and both boys turned and put their legs back on the back side of the fence to jump down away from the cornfield, when out of nowhere, something grabbed Dale by the arm. Both boys turned and looked, and they saw the scariest thing they've ever seen in their life. It was a subject standing there. His skin was falling off his arms. The skin was falling off his face. Both boys screamed. Dale tore his arm away from the object, or the subject, or whatever you want to call it, and started running down the road. But he looked down at his arm, and he noticed as he was pulling away from the subject, the fingernails dug down in his skin, and it cut his skin. Both boys ran to their homes. But of course, no one believed them. Everything was okay for a few days, but Dale noticed that his arm kept getting more and more infected. So he went to his mother and told his mother that, showed him the arm, and his mother said, "Well, we need to go to the doctor." So they took Dale to the doctor. The doctor treated for poisoning and gave him medicine, and started working on the infection, and he was sent back home. Well, about 2 or 3 days after that, it kept getting worse. So they take him back to the doctor, and the doctor again works on his arm and sends him back home. After about a week of this, and it's not getting any better, it seems to be getting worse, they go back to the doctor the third time. This time the doctor says, "We need to put him in the hospital so we can control this infection and give him antibiotics through IVs." Well, they put him in the hospital. Days go by, weeks go by. He's not getting any better. He's actually getting worse. He has all kind of infection all over his body. So the doctors are telling his parents they don't think they can save him. This looks like he's going to die. Well, they go home and they tell Gary about what they've heard from the doctors. So Gary wants to go see his friend one last time before maybe he passes away. So they had not been letting anybody into the hospital room due to the fact that it was infection. They didn't want to get any worse by somebody bringing some bacteria in, so they agreed to let Gary go into the room. So one evening about dusk, Gary goes to the hospital, And the hospital is located in Danbury, North Carolina, which is a small community, and this is a farming community, so there's not a whole lot of industry or any. There's a state park, I believe, near the location where people go camping and things of that sort. Gary arrives at the hospital, and he goes up, and there's no nurses around the area, so he goes up and finds the room and walks into the room. And just as he walks into the room, he looks, and Dale's starting to get out of bed. Dale is so shocked by seeing Gary, and Gary's so shocked about seeing Dale that Dale stood up, and Gary threw himself back against the wall. There, in Gary's vision, was what he'd seen in the field. Dale's skin was starting to fall off. It was coming off his face and off his arms. Gary, scared to death, ran out of the room, ran out of the hospital, drove home as fast as he could. One of the nurses in the nearby rooms heard the commotion and heard Gary screaming, so she comes out in the hallway and looks around and doesn't see anything. She starts to walk down towards Dale's room and looks in Dale's room, and there's skin laying on the bed and laying on the floor. But there's no Dale to be found anywhere. She contacts the local sheriff's department because they had no security there at the hospital. They shut down the hospital. They look everywhere for Dale, but he couldn't be found. So, the next time that you're camping in the rural areas of North Carolina and southern Virginia, beware. There might be a zombie near you.